Some people are concerned about the Ardlings' angelic flight trait, as in, flight on first level. But I don't think it's overpowered at all. Do you have an unforgettable player character entrance in an encounter? I do, thanks to Tieflings. I remember how confused I was the first time I had to deal with halfling rogues in 5e, and the naturally stealthy and cunning action combo controversy. If you're unfamiliar with the discussion, consider yourself lucky. Does it sound confusing? Yes, it is. How confusing? I guess I would give it an unbearably frustrating nightmare confusion score. Hello and welcome to the Deep Dice Press. We are a bunch of friends in their 30s who have played D&D since our teen years and who love role-playing and storytelling. In a given day, it just so happened that we were all going through career transitions and thought, why not give a shot on developing D&D products? And that's how our indie D&D publisher was born, small in size but big in aspirations. Our purpose is to take your D&D adventures to the magical excitement and deep immersion we experience with the epic tales and narratives of humankind. If you find this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the bell to receive notifications of new videos with similar content. You can also find the links for our social media on the description down below. A few weeks ago, Dungeons & Dragons announced One D&D, an umbrella project aimed at the 50-year celebration of the game in 2024. One D&D includes the development of its own virtual tabletop, supported with the Unreal Engine, the expansion of the D&D Beyond digital tools, and the release of updated core books. The new Player's Handbook rules will be developed over 1 year and a half, with a monthly public release of rules blocks in the internet. This approach will allow the D&D community feedback, which will then be used as an input to refine the rules. The first topic was Character Origins, that deployed several positive changes on races, backgrounds, and feats that I have already covered in another opportunity. Today, I wanted to share my feedback on the races that I believe still have important adjustments to make. First, we'll discuss which things One D&D Character Origins needs to fix with Tieflings and Ardlings. One D&D expanded Tieflings and introduced Ardlings, but those races still need adjustments. Then, we'll talk about the things One D&D Character Origins needs to fix with Halflings and Gnomes. I believe those two races still need relevant improvements to become appealing, and that nobody's gonna play Halflings and Gnomes unless One D&D rules fix them. There are a lot of things One D&D gets right, but there's also a few much needed changes, and I have a few thoughts to share of what I would do to address them. So join us, won't you? One D&D expanded Tieflings' options and powers and introduced Ardlings, a new celestial race mirrored in the renewed Tieflings race design. I think the flavor for both those races is great, and I pretty much loved their associated game mechanics. Having said that, I think there are still things One D&D Character Origins needs to fix with Tieflings and Ardlings. Do you have an unforgettable player character entrance in an encounter? I do, thanks to Tieflings. I love when players go the extra mile to bring flavorful scenes to the game table. My players were tracking down a villain who had grasped a few small villages under his tyrannical claws. He became an oppressing outlaw force in the region, extorting villagers and kidnapping the young members of families who refused to pay his tithe. Players knew that a former member of those villains was in a tavern, but didn't know who he was. But our Tiefling player knew what to do. Don't worry, I got this. Here's what I want to do. I'm gonna use thaumaturgy to scare the shit out of the entire tavern. I don't want to get in. I want the tavern doors to slam open, and as soon as I step inside, I want one window after the other to fling open and shut. I want all lanterns of the tavern to flicker into an eerie purple. I'm gonna get in with my hood on, and when all eyes are on me, I'll make my eyes go into flaming purple, and as I get my hood off, I want to fling the nearest chair into the air with my tail. And then, with a thunderous voice, I'll say, I'm here to collect Damaso's soul. You can either repent and confess where he is, or I will take your own soul instead. And then I'll just wait to see whom everybody looks at, or whoever appears to have seen the devil himself. Because he has. Should he roll performance, intimidation? Nah, just take the guy, he's all yours, and thanks for that scene. Tieflings were introduced in the very first Planescape campaign setting, way back in the 2nd edition of D&D. In 3rd edition, they became a playable race in the Forgotten Realms campaign setting. They finally acquired the status of a core D&D race in 4th edition, along with Dragonborns, and gained instant popularity. Why? Come on! A hero who looks like a devil? That's the ultimate level of theatrical coolness one can reach. One D&D brings some additional flavor for Tieflings thanks to the Infernal, Chthonic, and Absol legacies, which expand Tieflings beyond their devilish heritage, adding demons, other fiends, and even cadaverous looks. The newly introduced Ardlings have a similar race mechanics design, with 3 celestial legacies: Exalted, Heavenly, and Idyllic. I think both those races have a similar power level, and that both of their current design still needs a small buff. I'll make a direct comparison with Elves, since Elves are among the most powerful races and have a similar design with both Tieflings and Ardlings in One D&D. Both Elves and Tieflings have dark vision. Next, Elven lineages and Tieflings' fiendish legacies have the exact same design. 1 cantrip and 1 small buff at 1st level, a 1st level spell at 3rd level, and a 2nd level spell at 5th level. So far, that's a tie. Then, Elves have keen senses, which gives proficiency on perception, one of the most useful skills in the game. Tieflings have the Thaumaturgy cantrip, which despite some cool opportunistic uses, cannot be described as a powerful trait. For Tieflings, that's it, but not for Elves, who still get the Fey ancestry and the trance traits. When I look at that comparison, it's very clear to me that Tieflings are below par. Not by much, but below. Even though Ardlings are a new race, as they were built mirrored at Tieflings, as their celestial counterpart, I think that they also need a small spin. Ardlings have a similar race design to Tieflings and Elves, so we can keep going with the same comparison. Ardlings' celestial legacies are identical to fiendish legacies or elven lineages. Ardlings seem not to have a small 1st level buff, but the reason for that is all 3 celestial legacies have the same radiant damage resistance. That, by the way, is a small flavor that could be adjusted. Why not resistance against force and psychic damages for 2 of them? But that's a side note. The only other race trait Ardlings have is Angelic Flight, which leads us to a pound-for-pound comparison of that trait against the remaining Tieflings traits, Dark Vision and Thaumaturgy. For me, those traits are roughly on par, so that Ardlings and Tieflings are also on par. But remember, Tieflings, and with that, Ardlings are a bit below par against Elves, and therefore they should both get a small buff. Some people are concerned about the Ardlings' Angelic Flight trait, as in, flight on 1st level. But I don't think it's overpowered at all. You can only use it a number of times equal to its proficiency bonus, which is 2 on initial levels. Then, you can only move your base speed with it, and you have to land somewhere at the end of your movement. That's basically 30 feet upwards. Come on, folks. Give my rogue a silk rope and a hook, and we see each other up there. Seriously, I'm very happy with this flight mechanic. I think D&D finally managed to incorporate it on a balanced way for 1st level characters. Which brings us back to my point. Both Tieflings and Ardlings need a small nudge to reach the same power level of Elves and other fine folks. And I can think of two options that would be a good fit. The first one would be simply giving both races advantage on charisma saving throws. That would fit the lower and upper planes flavor of those races, and it would be a useful trait for all classes across the board. The second option would be something like a celestial or fiendish aura, which would provide proficiency on one charisma-based skill of the player's choice. In One D&D, humans, elves, and halflings already have traits that provide skill proficiencies, so that should not be a problematic design approach. Tieflings already had a cool flavor which will probably get expanded in One D&D, along with the introduction of their celestial counterpart, Ardlings. I like the mechanics design presented for both races in One D&D, but I think they're still lagging a bit behind when compared to the most powerful races, elves, dwarves, and humans. I wouldn't be surprised if both of them were to get small buffs in new iterations of One D&D. Would you? There were little changes on halflings and gnomes, and that's a problem. Of course, there's a concern on keeping game mechanics backwards compatible with all 5e publications. But now that ability scores improvements are out of the way, I think that a direct comparison with other races will make evident gnomes and mainly halflings are still less interesting and less powerful than all other races. Not only that, One D&D managed to streamline the design for most races, but gnomes are clearly unaligned. Let's talk about what I don't like and about the things that One D&D Character Origins needs to fix with halflings and gnomes. Gnomes are perhaps the least known D&D core race. Right from start, that's a challenge on making it an interesting race to play with. After all, we're more used to elves, dwarves, orcs, dragons, and devils in all fantasy works, and that makes them an almost intuitive choice. Halflings don't appear in many fantasy works, but they're the central characters are nothing else but the Lord of the Rings. Gnomes, unfortunately, are mostly relegated to house gardens, children cartoons, and fairy tales. That lack of common knowledge would be enough to make it hard for anyone to distinguish a forest gnome from a rock gnome. But their race traits make that an even harder task. I've had entire campaigns with gnome characters that have not once used Speak with Small Beasts or Artificer's Lore. They're way too specific traits. With all that in mind, I would guess One D&D should have at least two goals in mind on reviewing the gnome race design. First, make them more appealing. And second, better differentiate their two lineages. So it was a disappointment to me that gnomes saw little change in One D&D. Their base speed was increased to 30 feet, as it was done with dwarves and halflings. Rock gnomes also got an additional cantrip, but again, that's not enough. Let's rely on a comparison with elves. Both of them have dark vision. Check. Gnomish Cunning is pretty cool, as it grants advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saves. One could argue that that is comparable in power to the whole elf package of King Senses, Fey Ancestry, and Trance. Okay, also check. The gnomish lineages, however, are inferior when compared to the elven lineages. Forest gnomes, for instance, have simply one cantrip and one first-level spell, Speak with Animals. One could argue that gnomes get all their gnomish lineage benefits on first level, and elves don't. But for me, that's another problem. Elven lineages, fiendish legacies, and celestial legacies are all neatly streamlined. Having a weird-looking gnomish lineage bothers me. It makes the race mechanics less intuitive and therefore more complicated. And I don't think it would be hard to streamline gnomish lineages with other lineages and legacies, and at the same time give the power buff that gnomes still need to be well balanced with the remaining races, in my opinion. So, my forest gnome lineage would have the minor illusion cantrip at first level, Then Speak with Animals, not on first but on third level, and finally Animal Messenger, a second level spell once the character reached fifth level. For rock gnomes, I would first transform what is so far known as the Tinker race trait into a ritual cantrip. Create Minor Construct, for instance. There, you no longer have a 5-paragraph race trait. You're welcome. Then, my rock gnome lineage could have the Create Minor Construct cantrip at first level, then Alarm, a first level spell at third level, and finally Arcane Lock, a second level spell at fifth level. There you go. 2 gnomish lineages neatly streamlined with their elves, tieflings, and ardlings counterparts, and with a needed buff to reach a power level similar to elves and the most powerful races. Maybe even more importantly, game mechanics that provide additional flavor, make them more appealing to play with, and better differentiate forest gnomes and rock gnomes from each other. I remember how confused I was the first time I had to deal with halfling rogues in 5e, and the naturally stealthy and cunning action combo controversy. If you're unfamiliar with the discussion, consider yourself lucky. Here's how it goes. The halfling's naturally stealthy trait lets them hide behind medium creatures, even in plain daylight. The cunning action rogue trait allows a free hide attempt as a bonus action. So, my halfling rogue moves behind a party member and takes the hide action and succeeds in a stealth check. That grants disadvantage to anyone who tries a ranged attack against me, as long as I'm not in their line of sight. I should also get a +2 AC bonus for the half cover. After all, I'm behind another creature. On my next turn, as long as I am still hidden, I can make a ranged attack with advantage. But my target gets a +2 AC bonus for half cover, as my party member is still between me and my target. My attack gives my location away, so I try to hide again using my bonus action, and repeat that every single turn of every combat. Does it sound repetitive? Because it is. Does it sound confusing? Yes, it is. How confusing? I guess I would give it an unbearably frustrating nightmare confusion score. So much so that a quick search in the internet will bring you numerous different interpretations for that combo. One D&D ends with this clumsy design once and for all. Naturally Stealthy now simply provides proficiency in stealth. Phew! Much simpler and much functional. That's the good news. The bad news is, not much else was changed in halflings. Better known as hobbits, halflings are central in the Lord of the Rings, D&D's original inspiration. They have been around since the game's early editions, when they were forced to change names due to a legal dispute. Despite that, they're the least popular core race, and there's a reason for that. They're the weakest 5e race. Much to my disappointment, despite their unattractive design, halflings saw little change in One D&D so far. The halfling's base speed was increased to 30 feet, which I think is great and provides a small buff. Their 3 core race traits, Brave, Halfling Nimbleness, and Luck, had their wording clarified, but kept their effects identical. Finally, the aforementioned naturally stealthy trait was nerfed, simplified, and promoted to a core halfling trait. Formerly, the 2 halfling sub-races, Lightfoot and Stout, had different race traits. That was suppressed, which makes sense for some reasons. First, they only had 2 different traits each, and one of them was an ability score improvement. They are no longer associated with race. Then, the Stout Resilience trait was identical to the Dwarven Resilience trait, which made it unoriginal at best. Finally, while that was not explicit in the player's handbook, those 2 halfling subraces have different skin tones in some campaign settings, and D&D is trying to move away from real-world race associations, even though they keep screwing that up. As you can see, those changes didn't provide a buff to halflings, and they're still way below par. Let's make a direct comparison with the new orc design. We could say that the halfling's luck and brave traits are compared to the orc's relentless endurance and powerful build traits. The first of each among the coolest traits available, and the remaining two with the most specific and marginal applications. Then, halflings have the stealth proficiency versus the orc's dark vision. I would totally argue that dark vision is better because it is less class specific. Stealth proficiency is quite useless for fighters or paladins, and dark vision is useful for all classes. Finally, orcs have the adrenaline rush trait, which is much better than the halfling nimbleness trait. I think that such comparison helps to make clear how underwhelming the halflings design still is. Halflings are in dire need of a power buff in future D&D iterations. If I were to review their design, I would add both the skilled and resourceful traits, as I think they are a great match both in gameplay and in flavor. Concerning flavor, if the original Hobbit trope is to be kept, halflings have, quote, family and community helping shape their lives. And at the same time that many of them are provided with a, quote again, brave and adventurous spirit. I think those traits are a good match to that description. In terms of gameplay, the skill trait that simply provides proficiency in one additional skill of the player's choice is a good balance for those classes that would not benefit as much as others from the naturally stealthy trait. The resourceful trait provides inspiration after a long rest, which is a great complement to the luck trait. Halflings were my big disappointment in this first One D&D iteration. Of course, doing away with clumsy game mechanics is great, but in my viewpoint, halflings are so below other races' power level in the player's handbook that I was quite surprised with the small changes they went through. I bet that the community feedback in the survey will be similar to mine, and I would expect a bolder design in future One D&D publications. I totally get that One D&D should try to preserve as much backwards compatibility as possible, and that would mean keeping a similar race power level to 5e. But there are other things more important than that. It's a great opportunity to streamline confusing mechanics and traits, making game mechanics simpler and more intuitive. It's also a great opportunity to identify and correct past design imbalances. Halflings and gnomes still need adjustments to reach those goals, and I believe the previous suggestions would help closing the existing gaps. What do you think? We talked about a lot of things, so let's try to wrap it up. One D&D Character Origins brought a fresh take on character races. I very much like the general approach on race traits, and I think that most races are next to a final design. There are, however, 4 races that I think need some fixes. Tieflings, Ardlings, Gnomes, and Halflings. Tieflings and Ardlings were built mirrored into each other, each of them with 3 legacies, which take the place of what was called sub-races in 5e. Each of their legacies have 1 damage resistance, 1 cantrip, 1 first level spell, and 1 second level spell, tailored to reflect the flavor of each legacy. In addition to that, all Tieflings get Dark Vision and Thaumaturgy cantrip, while all Ardlings receive Angelic Flight. Flight has always been a very controversial race trait, especially in lower levels, but I think this time One D&D nailed it. It has a very limited number of uses and requires the character to land at the end of its use, covering only the distance of its base movement. Despite the cool design for both Tieflings and Ardlings, my evaluation is that they are underpowered when compared to other races and should still get additional race traits, which would be necessarily new ones given that the Tieflings kept all traits they already had in 5e. I can think of 2 options that would be aligned with those races, either advantage on charisma saves or proficiency on a charisma skill of the player's choice. Very little was changed in the Gnomes design compared to 5e, and that's a problem. Not only because they are a bit underpowered when compared to other races, but also because their gnomish lineages breaks the pattern established for elves, tieflings, and Ardlings. But I don't think that it would be hard to fix them. My suggestion would be that each of their lineages simply follow the same design of the other races. Forest gnomes could get minor illusion, speak with animals, and animal messenger as their lineage, while rock gnomes could have tinker, alarm, and arcane lock, for instance. Those designs would give a welcome power buff and would better reflect the intended flavor for each gnomish lineage. Halflings are the big disappointment of One D&D in my opinion. They were the weakest race in 5e and so remain in One D&D. There are no more different race traits between their two sub-races. Naturally stealthy was nerfed and now only provides proficiency on stealth, and that's truly a relief given the very clumsy mechanics it had so far. Their base speed is now 30 feet, but with only that in addition to the brave, luck, and halfling nimbleness traits, they are truly underwhelming compared to all other races. I think they would need a big buff to fix that, such as an additional skill proficiency of the player's choice and free inspiration after a long rest, for example. Despite the disappointing design of Gnomes and Halflings, truth is that the new take on Tieflings and the addition of Ardlings are very exciting. And given that we have another year and a half of playtesting ahead, I wouldn't worry much. I trust the D&D community has spoken about what bothers them in those four races, and there's plenty of time to fix them. If you're interested in the content of this video and would like to know more about it, click on the link on the description below to download for free our booklet, Make Your Character Matter. You can also find more related content in our social networks. All links are available in the description below. If you want to check out a module where we apply all concepts discussed in this channel, look out for our new campaign, The Kingdom of Cormyr, One Purple Raven, available next winter. Clicking on the screen, you may find other videos on One D&D changes and more. Our next video in this series is, Are Spelljammer and Dragonlance the new normal for D&D? If you think it might be interesting for you, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell to receive notifications for new content. This video makes part of our series on the future of Dungeons & Dragons. In this series, we will discuss everything that will shape the future of the game, including detailed analysis of One D&D rules playtesting and D&D upcoming product releases. And yet, the best way to shape the future of Dungeons & Dragons is sharing our feedback and impressions about what's being published. So be sure to share your reactions and perceptions in the comments down below. What races need adjustments in One D&D? I'm sure your opinion will help us think along with many other people. Thank you for sharing this moment with us. We are the Deep Dice Press.